Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I say a few words about our work, about the results that we have achieved. The British presidency has done a lot of consolidating work and organized a joint meeting in the format of G8 on a very high level. Lough has proved once again that this is a very topical instrument on the issues of world policy and economic development. The non-formal discussions that we had in the working type of environment enabled us to work out collective actions. And once again, with G8 partners, we discussed how to stimulate global economic growth, how to eliminate disbalances that led to the economic crisis and other problems. And we decided to promote world trade, eliminate protectionist barriers, not create new barriers for the flows of investments. A very important element of universal economic rules should be based in the framework of the WTO. We also agreed to move forward regional integration, where new markets will facilitate cooperation and promote new employment. We discussed different aspects of tax avoidance and tax criminal acts. The necessity to improve transparency, fighting against offshore zones, which will stimulate development of different countries, including the less rich countries. We also spoke about discussing it in a wider scope during the G20 meeting in St. Petersburg in Russia. British presidency was supported by promoting business activity as well as facilitating work in extracting industries, which is particularly pertinent for developing countries. Confidence-building measures are very important. The new database for larger transparency should be also introduced. We gave special attention to this in Russia because we are number 20 in the UN rating from 191 states on transparency, fiscal transparency. And from 77 countries, we are number 10 in the open budgets and transparent budgets. International development goals have also been discussed within the outreach format with the heads of governments and states that were invited, as well as international organizations. Discussing international issues, clearly particular attention was given to Syria. We suggested that we should work together within G8 in the framework of Geneva II conference. The bloodshed has to be stopped, and this is what we called for. This can be achieved only by political and diplomatic means. We take the view that any weapons provision to the opposition and as a resulting measure for chemical weapons use can only exacerbate the situation. We discussed other matters of peace process in the Far East, in Sub-Saharan Africa and in North Africa. Drug trafficking has also been mentioned. We decided to seek for political and diplomatic measures in North Korea, and nuclear Iranian program has to be given particular attention. And the majority of all the issues discussed is stated in the communique. As of 1st of January 2014, Russia will be the president in G8. G8. We obviously will take into account what has been done by the British colleagues, as well as all the decisions that will be taken during the G20 meeting. I invited my colleagues to the 5th of June 2014, and the meeting of the G8 will, the summit of the G8 will take place in Sochi. Friends, we have about 20 minutes for questions and answers, so please, without much ado, ask your questions. Vladimir Vladimirovich, a lot of attention has been given to your discussions and meetings with President Obama. We waited for this for a long time. Could you please let us know, after exchange of communiques, has the issue of MD, missile defense, been raised, and has there been any movement forward? Yes, we did. We spoke a lot about the disarmament, about MD, about possible cooperation in this field. We do have some issues that we haven't agreed upon, but we also spoke about what we can do, and that is become more transparent, more open. And the president of the US, he is prepared, as far as I understood, to widen the scope of this discussion, and this will be continued when he next comes to Russia in the eve of G20. This meeting will take place in Moscow, and then the actual G20 meeting will be held in St. Petersburg. We spoke a lot about it, and there are some positive movements in this regard. And what was the decision what was the discussion, the essence of discussion with Obama in respect of Syria, in the light of chemical weapons use? And this peace conference, can it be held? When can it be held? And if your communique can also be used as maybe there will be no need in the conference if you agree on everything. Yes, we did discuss Syria a lot, but in fact it wasn't based on the bilateral with the US president. It was a very important meeting, I agree. But however, said that, the discussion with all G8 members was extremely useful. Clearly, Russia and the US today are particularly responsible and should be held responsible, and is decided that the Minister of the Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, as well as the State Secretary of the US, will be in charge of preparing the underlying principles of the settlement in the Syrian crisis. The bloodshed has to be stopped as quickly as possible. This is what we discussed as well, and that peace and reconciliation has to be reinstated within the framework of this work. Rights of all ethnic and religious groups have to be claimed and reinstated. Whatever one says about chemical weapons use, we all agreed unanimously that it should not be used in any circumstances, any WMDs, wherever the threat comes from, and whoever uses it. This is not acceptable at all. And we are absolutely sure that the conclusions, main conclusions, could be only drawn on the basis of a very careful test and investigation carried out. We don't have this information. Not all G8 members take the view that the chemical weapons were in fact used by the Syrian army. Some actually agree with us that there is no proof. Having said that, the government of Syria approached the UN asking to investigate the use of chemical weapons of the opposition. We know that there are some incidents of opposition leaders or members of the opposition being held, and they had on them chemical weapons. In Iraq, there was a laboratory producing chemical weapons for the opposition. So all these facts, all this information has to be studied very carefully, and the results of this investigation will be presented to the UN Security Council, where Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council and clearly will be very active in assessing the situation. This is very satisfactory to us. Moscow Komsomolets. Victoria Prihodska is my name. During the summit, we heard some statements. We also read the media reports, and we had a feeling that you were 1 against 7, or 7 plus 1, but not at all 8, at least in Syria. Is that the way you felt? Were you lonely there? No, not at all. Probably someone wanted this to be presented in this way, but it wasn't at all the case. And I take full responsibility, and my colleagues will reiterate that. We had a very good discussion. We had disagreements, that is true, but I never felt lonely, and Russia never was on its own, had been on its own in making a statement again in regards of Syria. Clearly, some want to have more details, others less, but it was a joint discussion with great interest demonstrated. People who want to find a very effective, a joint and common solution to the Syrian problem. Cyprus has demonstrated a problem with offshores. You discussed offshores, how to fight offshores jurisdictions. You spoke about it in the presidential address. Is there any progress in offshores? I was particularly pleased. Fighting against offshores is not only a problem for Russia, it is a problem for the world economy. We did realize that. But the British presidency did take the initiative. It was a leader. It has become a leader. And I was particularly pleased about this. And it was particularly pleasing because the British jurisdiction is the one that brings together many offshore areas. And Prime Minister Cameron said that he is going to make everything possible to make it as open as possible, as transparent as possible, because bringing funds into offshore is really bad for our economies. And some investors don't want to bring serious investment in Russia because they don't know quite who they're dealing with. There are problems. It is a joint problem for all of us. And I would like to reiterate that Russia hasn't yet covered the route that other countries have succeeded to achieve in fighting offshores. And at the moment, we are in the process in opening the end beneficiary ownership. So in the Federation Council, this will go through all the motions. It will be ratified, and then, of course, I will sign it. There's no doubt about it. And it has to be very reasonable. We're not going to go against any principles or norms that are enacted now. And another innovative approach is the changes in the tax code, tax legislation, where we will provide necessary information from the requests by other tax authorities, other countries. Mikhail Petrov is my name. Economic theme. What do you think? You might know that US and EU started negotiations on the free trade agreement. How do you see it, whether it is positive or negative, and how is it going to affect Russia? Modern economy, it is intertwined. They're intertwined. If something happens in one, then the other will be affected. The volumes of trade have dropped down, and clearly Russia felt it straight away, particularly Russian economy. And growth rate has dropped down with our major trade partners. Some countries are still quite good, Japan, for example, whatever the weather. But other countries, there is a certain drop. So we're particularly interested to eliminate any bottlenecks, any problems, any breaks have to be lifted. And I very much hope that this will open new future for new trade relations. We stand for further integration in the post-Soviet space and establishing the common economic space in the former Soviet area. It is particularly pleasing to me that my colleagues in the G8 approve of the integration process in the post-Soviet area, including the customs union. I'm very, very happy about it. Mayak. June, not July. Don't come in July for the G8 summit. It'll be all over in July. It'll be in June, 3rd and 4th of June. Where is it going to happen? Are you building something new, or are you using the premises that are being prepared for the Olympics? And the British presidency, you are going to follow on, but what are you going to add, particularly Russian topics? Well, the second question I can't really cover because the agenda of the G8 summit, we are going to finalize it after British presidency is over. We will take over from the British friends and colleagues on the 1st of January 2014. We are now the president in the G20, and only in January, 1st of January, we'll become the president of G8. And then we'll start working on the agenda. Clearly, there's no doubt about it, and I told my colleagues about it. We will follow on. There's no doubt about it. That is security, safety for companies, citizens. Other topics will be discussed as well, but I think it is premature to discuss the actual agenda of the next summit. This has to come up in the course of negotiations with my colleagues in the G8. And we're not going to discuss something which is not acceptable and that we'll not agree upon. But actually, there are fewer and fewer topics of this nature. We're going to work in the spirit of cooperation, because that's the only way of working together in the G8 format. And the first question of yours, well, we have no intention at all to spend more money. This is exactly why we are inviting everyone to Sochi 3 months after the Olympics. Russia regularly blames Russia to the Syrian opposition, as you have already said in London, are particularly brutal and violent. Nevertheless, Russia sends arms to the Assad government, and thousands of people are dying on a daily basis on the basis of UN accounts. And what is going to be done? Are you going to have new contracts drawn? And what kind of weapons do you send to Assad? The most important thing, first and foremost, is that different goods is a different issue, because we fulfill legal contracts. This is the legal government of Syria, the government of Assad. There's no other legal government in Syria so far, and we are fulfilling our legal contracts. In New York, in the UN, there was proposal to sign a treaty with a preamble that non-governmental organizations, units should not be armed. In 1991, the European Union stated that weapons should not be sent to non-governmental organizations, particularly in the hot zones, in the zones of war conflicts. Now, the possible shipments of weapons by our European partners, arming the opposition. We're in the UK right now. Recently, the British people suffered huge loss. It was a tragedy. Next to his barracks in the streets of London, violent assassination, violent killing, I would rather, very brutal killing of a British serviceman. Clearly, the opposition is not composed of all of this, but many of them are exactly the same as the ones who perpetrated the killing in London. So if we equip these people, if we arm them, what is going to control and verify who is going to have these weapons, including Europe as well? So we called all our partners, before making this dangerous step, think about it very carefully. And the final question, RIA Novosti agency. Recent elections in Iran, just before the summit of the G8. Have you discussed the nuclear program of Iran? Could you say a few words how the position of Iran may change in the light of the new president? No, I can't. It depends on the position of the Iranian leadership, the new president that has been elected just now. He is a very experienced person. He knows the nuclear problematics extremely well, inside out. He is a modernizer. At least this is what is expected of him. But everything will depend on the concrete steps undertaken by the new Iranian government. We are closely connected, many centuries of traditions, of relationship with Iran. I think it's a Caspian country. We share the Caspian Sea with Iran, and hopefully we will continue discussions with Iranian leadership. And the former president might be in Moscow at the gas summit. We might discuss this, but as far as the future is concerned, it is all up to the new Iranian government. Thank you very much indeed.